Going back to another topic that I've already mentioned before, but only in passing, and that is explaining the world, the fictional setting, the world building, facts, re-establishing information, and sharing all that by and with other characters within that story, and then making sure that I use appropriate means in particular situations that require me to explain something so that I don't end up with characters asking questions they have absolutely no need to ask, considering that they supposedly exist within that setting, live there, and have been living there their entire lives. So, for example, two adult characters explaining the monetary system of their world or their country where they have lived or operated their entire lives to each other would have to be handled very, very carefully. Otherwise, it would end up just an explanation for the reader. So instead, maybe I could make the protagonist overhear a conversation of a parent and a child, the adult giving their curious offspring a lecture on how the payment system of that particular area works, which would to me appear more natural. But obviously, this exact tactic cannot be used all the time. Another option would be a foreigner. Again, maybe the protagonist hears the conversation, or the protagonist is the foreigner in that particular area and thus needs to ask a local some basic questions, or the protagonist looks up some information, written information, and while browsing that text, maybe overreads some other information that I feel that the story needs to tell in order to make sense. But again, the protagonist cannot be a stranger in every single place you'll ever enter, all the time in every single setting, and thus this will require me to procure this constant stream of new and interesting ways of introducing the surroundings, of bringing the observations that the characters make to the reader in an organic manner without ripping the reader out of the story, without the use of a narrator, because no narrator in my stories. And that is a challenge that I welcome. There are many that I am completely unsure if I'll ever be able to take on, but this one is something that I do find so important that I will do my utmost to somehow meet it and hopefully overcome it. But enough of my ramblings. The Rapid Arrows received an invitation from 8 clubs who originate from an area called Orange Mountains, a small interlude. In Czech, we have a word for mountains, hory, which insinuates these large, rocky, not much in terms of greenery, hard to scale natural formations. Then we have this word for hills, kopce, which insinuates something much milder, mostly covered in green, these elevations that cover the landscape but are much more friendlier towards tourists. And then we have another word that is often used in this book, which is scaly, and that is a bit more tricky because size wise they are nowhere near mountains or at least the meaning hints at that somewhat. But they are also not hills because they are mostly, if not entirely, made of rocks. They are hardly scalable, require climbing, effort, some amount of physical abilities, and so every time I come across this exact word and then have to use an English equivalent that is not actually conveying that meaning, it just goes against the grain. I'm sure that a true translator or anyone who actually knows English and Czech would have a way to deal with this. There are words like crag, but that has a meaning closer to some cliff or just rocky area, rocky hills, but it simply lacks the simplicity of that one word that my language has, and I lack the means of fully communicating it in a way that would leave me satisfied. But oh well, it's Orange Mountains and I'll somehow live. So the Rapideros accept the invitation or challenge for this grand game that these other clubs have prepared for them and get ready for this shorter holiday to be spent doing this activity. When it's time to get on the train, Speedy makes a bit of a spectacle from himself because he once again overpacked and has to push this huge tin can in front of him with a stick, for his bags have no more space for it. When they arrive at the area where the game will take place, they receive a very warm welcome, including a celebratory war cry performed by the other clubs. Then they gather around and the rules of the game are explained to them. It is a variation of Indians against soldiers. The Indians will erect a totem somewhere in the mountains, will be tasked with protecting it, since it's the one thing that is bolstering their courage and battle spirit, and the soldiers are supposed to somehow find it and then knock it down. Everyone uses cones as ammunition. The Indians wear their headdresses to distinguish themselves, and everyone has 5 lives. These small pieces of paper that the owner of a nearby newsstand gives out. Once they lose all 5 of their lives after being hit 5 times, they have to make the trek back to the village and rearm themselves with new lives. Also, small details like no one is allowed to hit a person who is handing over their life to the person who hit them, and the time frame during which the game will happen. With all that out of the way, the rapid arrows are going to hide their bags somewhere. They say their farewells to the rest of their soldier compatriots, climb a tree to hide their bags in the branches, leaving only knapsacks fully loaded with cones, Speedy reminding everyone to literally stuff every single pocket they have with cones since there will be no time to reload during the fray. And then it's finally the beginning, and barely making it a few steps into the forest, they fall into an ambush set up by the Indians, and despite trying to shoot back, every one of them loses one of their lives while only claiming 2 back. So the first battle may have ended up in a loss, but now it's time for counteroffensive and maybe set up a trap, an ambush of their own. So Redcap rushes out to find some prey for them while the rest of the Rapidaros get into position. Then we can see him running back, smoothly avoiding all projectiles. And then when he runs past the hiding spots of the rest of the club, a storm of earth and fire rains onto the enemies' heads, and thus they manage to reclaim their previously lost pride. Then another surprise meeting with other participants, but this time it's not the Indians, it's fellow soldiers still reeling from the shock. The other club mentions that apparently the Indians' totem is supposed to be somewhere up in the rocky area, the mountains. So they part ways with this group and begin searching the surrounding area. After an hour of scaling the rather unfriendly terrain, Mirek is becoming suspicious of being sent on a wild goose chase, while Speed is murmuring about being all battered by the cones from the Indians. They climb over one last peak, only to finally set their sights on the final prize, the Indians' totem, heavily guarded, the Indians being forbidden by the rules from entering the circle around the totem, are patrolling around the perimeter seemingly flawless with no ways of slipping into it. The only minuscule chance of success might be rushing through and hiding behind this rock, waiting for those directly guarding the totem to look away, and then another rush into the circle. Well, somebody has to try, go on their own, and attempt to carry out this mildly reckless plan. Maybe Slyboots, who's been keeping up with the rest of the club, will play some role, supportive role, in this sacrifice I meant heroic plan. But this is it for today, and next time I'm going to continue spouting nonsense and talking about this wonderful young adult adventure book.